Last time I was here on this beautiful show, right? I tried to tell you guys every time I'm here something new, something that I would have appreciated when I was a kid. Now, when I was a kid, what I did not appreciate is I thought that endgame play was about learning how to do, say, a bishop and knight versus king mate. All kinds of stuff like that, or maybe a certain catalog of rook endgame positions. No, not true. That is not the only thing about endgame play, but it's certainly part of it. All right? So you imagine you have three different kinds of endgame play. The algorithms, Dvoretsky's endgame manual, that's just a third of it. And honestly, as we're going to see in this game, it doesn't happen in most endgames. And in fact, in most endgames, what you will definitely have is the maneuvering part, which you're going to see here, most of it. And then the decisive part will usually be the endgame tactics, right? And I talked last time about Van Perlo's endgame tactics book. I like it a lot. Okay, so this game that I'm going to show you today, I'm going to try to use as an example of those three layers. The idea of the three layers is a pretty new thing for me, so I'm kind of using you guys as guinea pigs for this idea, which I like a lot. I'm playing here, maybe somebody actually, I wouldn't be surprised if he'd been on our U.S. chess school. I'm going to guess for sure he has. And it's this very talented young kid named Evan Park, and he's an FM, very talented. And honestly, as I was playing him a couple weeks ago at this Baltimore Open, and it's definitely intimidating, okay? Because I was black, and I could tell that the kid had really like a deep theoretical repertoire. And so I was afraid, right? I was simply afraid about his repertoire, and I did not want to get crushed. And I could see in his repertoire, too, that it was like, you could tell he had done a lot of chessable work, and he had turned on the computer in a variety of positions. So I'll just share how this began. And I've played, by the way, this position for at least 20 years, well over 20 years. I've played a6. I've played bishop e7. I've played ct4. I've done it all. And basically, when you turn the computer on, the computer likes, I would say, white more and more. every year that goes by, the computer likes the white position more. And that is because the computer likes space more and more. Okay. So I thought it would be a clever idea to do this endgame against the kid. Now, this is the thing that I want you guys to know. There is a common thing that you will hear GMs say, which is that you can beat kids, you all, in the endgame. That's where you guys are vulnerable. Now, it's important to see that when they say that, they're not necessarily saying that you don't know the algorithms, the Dvoretsky manual, though that might also be true just because you guys haven't had to deal with it that often, the algorithms. And I don't really think they're also, the tactics may be a little bit too, but the main thing they're saying when they say that kids can't play endgames, and this was certainly true of when I was a kid, is that the kids often lack a sense of what to do in the endgame. And it's often unclear just like what's going on when there's not a direct attack on the king. And so when you turn on the computer in this position, this has been known, by the way, this little endgame thing has been played, 60, 70 years, a lot of GM games. And even back in the day, it was kind of, the consensus was that white had a small advantage. But what that advantage consists of, that's a different question. Okay, so the first thing I would like to do is, can anyone tell me why they think white has an advantage, or just maybe some of the small things they notice in the position. White, by the way, has a huge choice here. Takes the queen, knight b5, maybe castles. All these moves are possible. Anybody want to come on? We got people saying the bishop on c8 is bad. Amazing bishop on c8. Okay, definitely true. Pranav wants knight b5. Strong outpost, bad bishop. Okay. Now, one thing I want to... Actually, I would like... Can anyone just say basic things about the position? Obviously, we got the bishop on c8. What other things can we say about the position? More space. Anything else? Eric says white has better development, more space, better pieces. d4 square for the knight, maybe f5. Oh, I like it. White is aiming for a claw setup. I like the claw, so maybe a pawn on h5. I should be using the word claw more often. I've heard the word bathtub. If you got h5, g4, f4, e5, that's kind of nice. So, the claw, in general, space on the king's side. Okay. Well, here's a couple things that I want to add. Okay. We have a French structure, all right? And the thing about the French that's a little tricky, this pawn structure, is the second white goes past. And this happens in the advanced French and other, the winnower. The second he goes past, what's really happening is he's made a claim for space, but he doesn't necessarily have more center control. It's an important difference because I have absolute control of these two squares, and it's not going to change for a while. That's just kind of a peculiarity of the French. The other thing, though, that's really important is, and this applies to this game a little bit, is my pawns are pointing this way. So that usually indicates that the queen side is where my play is going to be. Whereas white's play is going to be on the king side. At least that's the way it traditionally goes down in the French. Now, you could say to yourself, well, isn't that when you're doing some kind of attack? Well, a little bit, but it's important to see that even in the endgame, the pawns pointing there will generally be a strong side and a weak side. Not always, but usually. Okay. So, actually, we have an interesting thing in the chat saying Giri plays the French. It can't be that bad. And I want to stress, Giri plays a totally different flavor of French. And so in the same way that you have different flavors of Sicilian, you have different flavors of French. And here, one thing I would stress is that bishop b4 is the winnower, is a completely different flavor of French. And that's usually what Giri plays. But I don't want to talk too much about that. I want to talk about our endgame. So one of the things that was hard for me psychologically to do this for myself was the idea that I could be playing this position for a win. That doesn't mean I thought I was better or anything. I definitely didn't think I was better. But the idea just like, well, is this really a position where I could play for a win? And I've got this old mean Russian coach who's kind of got me thinking, trying to encourage me thinking that being a little bit worse is okay. And you can, the game goes on. And it's certainly true that with this position, I think I'm a little bit worse, but the game is really going to go on, and there's still a lot to be done. Okay, so this position, I knew that knight b5 was the computer's main choice, and my opponent played it very quickly, and I think what that said to me was, oh, he's looked at this with the computer. Now, queen takes is also fully playable, but let's look at this. And back in the day, when you look at the old games, the pre-computer games, knight b5 wasn't seen as much. And I think the reason is that after, say, king e7, white feared some kind of either f6 or g5, breaking up the center. But what the computer sees is that it's actually very hard to do after, say, bishop d3. Okay, so let's pause here for a second and talk about it. Now, first question we have in chat is, how do you stop the knight from getting to d6? And it's important to see that the knight isn't stable on d6. If it comes to d6, f6 will destabilize the knight. And then the worst possible world for that poor knight is if he ever had to take our bishop on c8. So the knight on d6 is often a very good piece, but here he will be made unstable. And this introduces some of Black's ideas here of playing at some point f6 or g5. I got to be super careful about when I do those, though, because as I said, that's generally my weaker side of the board. Okay? So, all right. There are several ways I can play this position. I played knight c5. My opponent played king d2. So far, he's played, as far as I can tell, perfect chess. Bishop d7. And so let's now think about White's situation. I think most people would say that he is better here. But here we definitely have what I'm going to call the maneuvering phase of the game. He's not going to be able to knock me out instantly, and he's going to have to come up now with a plan. So what I'd like to do is I want to bring anybody in here and ask just your thoughts about what you think White should do. Austin says White is much better. Well, maybe. It's an interesting question. And by the way, Black will have simple questions too about what he is doing. All right, let's get Austin in here. And maybe he goes. And by the way, I'm just asking for a plan. And it's important to see that there's probably more than one way for White to play.
So my thought initially was to play king e3 and then go g4, h4, h5. But because of how Black plays his pieces, I suspect he might be going for, like, as you said, these g5 and f6 ideas. So with that in mind, it might be better to actually put a rook on e1 to discourage f6 or g5, and then leave the king on d2, basically. Because the king, it does a fine job on d2. Because the knight on d4 doesn't need support yet. So we just keep the king on d2, play rook e1, and then go for g4, h4.
Okay, good. So let's say I gave you 4 moves. What would those 4 moves be?
Rook e1, g4, h4, h5.
So the bathtub.
Yep.
Like that. Okay. Well, that was in fact only 3 moves, but I will say that I like what you're saying because that at least is a plan which does not try to do anything immediately. It just tries to build your position.
Yeah, to improve the position.
Well, let me just ask you something. So let's say we play that move. It can't be a terrible move. And let's say I play h5.
Right.
Why do you do that?
Probably g3, h3 seems like a good idea. Because I know this idea from the King's Indian is like when you go a5, White always plays b3. Because if you go h3, then Black can play h4 and clank you down. So you have to play g3 first so that if h4 you can push past, and then h3. And then at some point, g4.
Okay, good. I like it. And we're getting in chat that maybe you could play g4 immediately, which is also true. And let's say if that's your idea, why don't we keep you on the line here for a second, and let's just imagine g4 because that's what some people are crying out for. And let's say h5. What do we do then?
Probably h3, but black doesn't have to play h5. I can imagine that black can play f6 instead.
Maybe, but I do want to say, I don't want to allow your bathtub. So that bathtub thing really scared me with h4, h5. So at some point, I do want to play h5. And f6, I got to say, maybe, but it scares me to death because of probably now your rook move. Does scare me. Right?
Right.
So I just want to say maybe, but I got to be super careful when I play f6 because I'm opening a lot of play. You know, I'm the one, if I play f6, I'm the one introducing a bunch of tactics into the position. Yeah. Okay, good, Austin. Let me try to bring in somebody else and just to get a sense of where people are in here in terms of a plan. Anybody else? And one thing I want to stress, okay, and this happens a lot actually in French positions, is a common problem that I had as a kid. Well, it's common, but I also had it as a kid, is that I was obsessed with pawn breaks. And that's where my correction to that obsession has been to coin the phrase pawns aren't people. And so the thing to see about the f5 pawn break is, yes, in some circumstances, it might be really great. But it's important to really see that the second you do play f5, this guy in e5 becomes weak, and you are giving this bishop an extra thing to do. Further, if you got to f5, it's not clear that that's the end of the world for me. If we just give you both g4 and f5, it's scary for me, but there's not anything directly bone-crushing that's going to happen to me when that goes down. All right, anybody else have an idea? Austin is talking about maybe, I'm just guessing the variation you're saying here is g4, f6, rook a e1, fe, rook e5, here, f5, king d6 is satisfactory for black. Maybe. So one idea could be, if this, then I got to worry about endgame tactics. Our old friend, endgame tactics. Yeah. So definitely that is a concern. Yeah. Good. No, and this is absolutely correct. If you play g4, you're going to want to be a little bit concerned about this. Let me just see. I am nervous about it, but let's give it a chance. So rook ae1 makes sense. Of course, you could take on f6 as well, but let's play here. Snip, snop, rook over. Yeah, let's just put the rook over. And I assume king d6. And, well, let's just put the rook back. Something like that. Well, actually, you're going to want to play the other rook over, right? Because you don't want to lose h7 so easily. So it's a little bit, yeah. And by the way, when you move pawns on the weaker side, that's the kind of grief that you'll eventually get. Some kind of, you have to play, I don't really want to play g6 or h6. Yeah. This might be playable for black, yeah. And one of the things I want to stress is that as a player on the black side, what I would love to do is catch white a little bit off guard. Have him worry about something on the queen side and then whack, hit him with g5 or f6. g5, by the way, is sometimes a cool idea, even with the idea of sacking a pawn. So here, boom, h4, and then I play h6 like Benko Gambit style. Sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. Just another idea. Okay, well, let's look at what Evan played. And one of the things I want to stress is I have not looked at this with the computer. And in fact, this game I'm going to spend a lot more time on my own just looking at it. I really, that's my whole mantra is forget about openings and look at your own games. So I'm going to spend a lot more time on it, but I'm going to guess that the computer would not think this a terrible move. All right, let's look at what happened. H4. And let's just ask ourselves, is this a good idea? And what's the good and the bad about H4? Now, Narayan has a great point where he says, well, H5, maybe all kingside play is shut down. Yeah, it might be true. Now, one thing I will say about H5 is, in general, I don't want to make pawn moves on my weak side. So if I play H5, which is in fact what I did, it will become a little bit harder for me to play moves like F6 because then I have more weaknesses, right? Now, here's where I want to say a little bit about this position. Ages ago, in the pre-computer age, I remember talking to a GM about this position, this kind of position. And he said, well, look, all you have to understand is that black plays H5 and then G6, and you sit on the position, and there's no way white will ever be able to break through, and then, quote, it's a draw. It's an interesting concept, by the way. I like the idea, but I want to say I've always rebelled a little against people when they say it's a draw. And you have people much stronger than me saying things like, oh, it's just a draw. And then I'm always confused. I'm like, what? It seems like there's so much still to play for. So Brian's saying you can prepare for F5. So let's imagine, actually, let's go G4, F5, H3, and let's imagine I just sit. So, right, it's going to be hard. It's going to be real hard. Especially since I'm the one who can build up moves like Rook H6 and Rook over and ask you, what do you want to do about my threat of HG? It's kind of rough. And again, when you play F5, I can kind of rip it all open. Okay, Aryan's saying after H4, maybe we could have played F5 for black. Maybe, though, I think a form of the bathtub, I was going to say the bathtub accelerated, but it's not really accelerated. A version of the bathtub would be H5 now. And white could definitely play for, say, here and G4 with conceivably good play. One thing about F5, though, is that here's an interesting thought, knight e4. And that brings us to something obvious that I want to touch on. The knight and bishop are interesting in that I really, really, really do not want to trade off my knight anytime soon because it's the only piece that can fight for the dark squares. So it's a little bit like when you've got two bishops and one good bishop is good and one is bad, you really don't want to trade off the good bishop because you can see here my light square bishop, it only touches the light squares. So if knight e4 ever, this is the thing I'm trying to say, if knight e4 ever happens, then white really needs to be looking for just king e3, ignoring the knight. And one of the big strategic / tactical questions for white this entire game will be, when I do play knight e4, can I create enough tactical mayhem with the knight in there that he has to take it? If he ever does have to take it, a lot of times we'll see that a DE maneuver can give my bishop a little bit more scope. Okay. There's nothing wrong with bathtub thingamajig. Nothing wrong with bathtub thingamajig. Okay, well, let's now reconsider what's happening here. I thought this was a really interesting position now because, well, white can still play for G4. It doesn't mean his play is over, but it's going to be a lot more difficult once it happens. in particular, like to do something after. But you can imagine like playing for g4 and then forcing an h5, right? Getting some space that way. G4, like rook g1, g4, pawn takes, rook takes, and when g6 happens to force h5 through in some way. And you might be able to do it because that is your side of the board. And by your side of the board, what do we mean? We just mean it's easier for you, white, to bring force to bear on that side of the board. It's hard for my knight to do anything. It's possible for my bishop to do anything over there, for example. But on the other hand, if we say white doesn't do anything over there on the king side, then at least from, let's call it middle game perspective, if I want to call it that way, from the perspective of strategic play, the pawns are in fact pointing towards the queen side. So we should think that maybe black should be able to do something on the queen side. Okay. So I think this is now a phase of the game where white has trouble finding a plan. And one thing I just want to say is white has played, this was like game, what was it? We got more minutes at move 40. So we had like 90 and 40 and 30-second delay. And white has used only 1 minute on the clock to play all the moves through h4. But he's getting 30 seconds each time. And it's here that he spends some time thinking about what to do. And honestly, it's a little hard. I'm going to guess, by the way, that if you turn on the computer, I don't think the computer is going to say h4 is a bad move. And maybe I'm wrong on that. I don't think it will. I don't think it's going to dramatically change its evaluation. It's still going to say white's better. But you can see now it's really hard to know what is it that what is it he should do. Okay, so he plays rook h3. And here at least I had an idea. I'm going to play a move and I'm going to ask, can someone tell me what the ideas of the move are? I played a6. What is the ideas of a6? Anybody? Right, and Austin has it. Now, we have, some people said b5, some people said bishop b5, and the fact is that bishop b5 is indeed on the agenda now. Now, it will be a tactical thing, whether I can make it work or not, but that is definitely something I would like to do. Okay. Now, my sense is that white slides here in the next couple moves. And what I mean by that is, like, move for move, things slowly go downhill for him here. And it's not like there's one cataclysmic mistake. It's just move for move. And I want to stress that the main reason the slide is happening is he doesn't know what to do. And again, when the old timers make fun of you guys, it's these kinds of positions. They're like, maybe we can beat them. And we got to have something because you guys are killing us in most other phases of the game. All right, so he played rook g3, and I think the hope intention is that by forcing me to play g6, that now f6 looks worse, or basically is impossible. However, I'm not clear that that was such a terrible thing. We do want to say, and I think the computer will pick up on this, that it's a good thing from white's perspective that my pawns are all on light squares, right? Because those are the color of my bishops, and one of the USCL sessions that I did years ago, it wasn't even that long ago, was about what I called Capablanca's rule. The idea that you don't want your pawns in the same color of your bishop. Now, the good news about these pawns is While they are terrible for my own bishop, they do present a wall to the light square bishop. It's a further reason why I really, really do never want this trade, right? Something else, a feature of the position that I just want to mention is at the beginning of the endgame, when I play king e7, I feel great. I'm like, oh, my king's so cool, such a great thing. But one of the key features about space advantages in the endgame that I want to stress is often the king will be the real victim. And what I want you to just see is like the pawn on e5 makes it so that it's hard for my king to maneuver. My king's not going to be under mating threat in any foreseeable future, but it's going to be hard for the guy to maneuver. And so that's just a feature of the position I want you to see, whereas the white king has more potential, particularly on the dark squares. Now, there's nothing, I don't think g6 radically helped my position or anything, but, I do feel like it was a minor mistake to play rook g3. Now white plays rook e3. I think that was fine. And now, as my memory of this is that I can't get away with bishop b5. So I played this move. And this is one of the moves I'm actually going to question when I go over the game myself. I feel like I just like to put the rooks on the c file. I'm not 100% that I'm doing anything over there. I just love to put it on the c file. A different plan for me would be to say, hey, buddy, you need to play b5. And then after b5, you have, let's say, 3 ideas. Bishop c8, bishop b7, so that the knight can have this spot, at least the threat of that spot. And I like to think about the bishop on b7 as like a helicopter parent, because it's living through the dreams of the knight on e4. Because if the knight gets taken, then then the bishop will become very powerful. And again, actually not again, I haven't said it yet, but one of my favorite quotes is, there are no such thing as bad bishops, there are only bad players. I think Nigel Short came up with that. Okay, so here we go. Rook hc, maybe mildly poor. My opponent makes, I think, a good move, a3. Why is it a good move? Because the control over the dark squares is a good thing, and it helps prevent bishop b5. So for example, if white had played something like this, I feel pretty strongly that that's now going to work. I believe it's now going to work. Okay, because I will have the tempo on this pawn after pawn takes. And you see this in a lot of French positions where this pawn controlling the dark squares is a good thing. And one of the tricky things about the position for black is, even though in a traditional mindset, the queen side is my side of the board, it's still true that I do not have control of the dark squares. All right, rook c7, b3. I think that's also okay. And it now has a threat of white playing a4. Well, so I play b5. Now let's pause for a second. What should white do? You can imagine white saying to himself, all right, a3 made sense to me. I was controlling b4. And you can see it's useful here. If I could play b4, I think I would like to. And then he played b3, and he said to himself, well, I'm maybe threatening to play a4 and clamp down on the queen side. But now that he's stopped, what is he supposed to do? Now, what's he supposed to do here, my friends? Vihan says a4. I don't know. Let's say if a4, I take that thing. Looks pretty good, right? Yeah, any ideas here for white? It's kind of tricky. Who said c3? Eric wants g4. If somebody wants to come on and explain c3, I'd be interested in that. That was Naranyan. You want to come on? Let's bring
So
it.
I played c3 to go for bishop to c2 and then go for a4. The threat of knight b3 is not there, and threats on the c file are non-existent because of the rook on e3.
Okay, good. I like that. And one of the things that I would like to stress from the white perspective is you don't necessarily have to play moves with, let's say, a plan of a4. I'm not sure about a4. Remember, you're going to make my bishop good when you play a4. But I do think that the move c3 is a good move because it will further control the dark squares and make it more difficult for me to expand on the queen side. Let me read another quote from Austin here. White should be objective and accept he's not better anymore and make a draw by sitting tight and giving black the onus to find a plan. Well, maybe. But on the other hand, I think, the move c3, let's just say c3, bishop c2, that's just a nice improving, it's not even a plan, it's just an improvement of the position, which I think can't be wrong. And it contains whatever rook drama I want to do on the queen side. One idea behind rook c7, by the way, too, is maybe I'm going to be thinking about, bishop c8 and bishop b7, and then the helicopter parent knight e4. And of course, maybe I can get enough drama on the c3 square for you to take. And once you take, then we've got a totally different game on our hands, because then the bishop will be reasonable. So that's one of the concerns that white has. Now, of course you could sit and say to yourself, I'm not better, but I think it's important to see, at least I want to stress for my own self, is that I don't believe that the game is simply a draw. Maybe super strong players can say that. To me, they're still like, in the same way that you could say that the beginning position in chess is a draw, maybe you could say it, but we know that mistakes are going to be made by both sides. And so we should also expect here that mistakes are going to be made. Okay, let me just read some more of these messages here. We got another idea with king c1 followed by king b2 and then wait around a little bit. Fine. Yeah, you could play king c1. One thing that I want to stress is I don't know if I would take on d3 if you played king c1, but that in general, white wants to take back with the pawn. No, it's no big deal. You can take with a rook, of course, in this position. It would be such a cataclysmic trade for black to take that thing anyway. Yeah. Okay, now one of the things I want to stress about this position is that I see myself in what Evan did here, because he doesn't have an active plan, and now he is the one who initiates tactical play. And that's when things are truly going to get terrible. I want to go ahead and say I think he's technically still better here after c3. I think black has, not too much to fear, but I just think his pieces are a little bit better after c3. Well, later I'll ask the computer. Part of the problem, though, with a move like c3 is what are we going to do in the coming moves? For example, it's all nice and good to say you're going to sit, but let's say this happens. And then you see to yourself as white, you're like, wait a second, when he plays knight e4, I need some move where I do not take the knight. Might not be so easy, right? Now all of a sudden the knight e4 threat is a real deal. It's a real deal. So all of a sudden, not so easy. You could play then maybe rook c1, bishop b7. It's still hard. It's still hard to not take that thing when it lands there. And I can, make it a little bit more powerful here. And I really want to stress, once I get this fat pawn on e4, then the pawn will even be thinking of sacrificing itself just to loose the kraken. And that brings me actually to another narrative of the game, which is that if black is going to win, it will be by a loosening of the bishop. And Josh Friedel, my friend, GM Friedel, had a great quote where he told me once, we were just hanging out, and he said, the thing about a bad piece is when he gets out of prison, he's just so angry. And one of the reasons, it's kind of like like a jailbreak. He's just been in there. He's been in there for decades, man, and he's just really angry and wants to really get at life. And one of the reasons it feels that way, I think, is there's so many squares that white now doesn't have to worry about, like white squares within the white camp. But once the bishop, gets entrance to those squares, then it's a totally different deal. We got a question. What's so bad about taking on e4? It's not the end of the world. It's just that my bishop on b7 gains more scope. And the idea I can go to d5. The bishop just feels so much better about life once de happens. Okay. So let's look at what white did. Rook g1. And this, to me, kind of suggested that, he doesn't want to sit. It's not psychologically able to sit, right? And he's seeing maybe ideas like bishop c8, bishop b7. He's worrying, he's asking himself, wait a sec, can I sit? So now all of a sudden he's introducing the idea of, now let's get a party started with g4. Now, we got to say, this is all of a sudden now, we're getting to a tactical phase of the game. And the second he starts doing stuff like g4, his rooks are going to have to attend to that drama over there. And whilst the rooks are doing it, that's going to be all of a sudden my moment. Okay, so what did I do? I played rook b8. And now, definitely, I think a mistake. Rook h3. And I think he played it fairly quickly. The problem with this is b4 is definitely a strategic victory for me. Because if he pushes a4, which he does, I now have access to the c3 square, and the pawn just being on a dark square now all of a sudden gives this bishop a dream about maybe being active from the a6 square. So I do, of course, have to wonder about g4 coming. It is true that if I gave him enough time and say, let's say I gave him a couple moves with g4, hg, rook g4, and then h5, that those rooks would eventually become active, and I would have a problem. There's no doubt about it. So I now switch, rook h8, g4, and I don't think he should have done it. I think he was already psychologically committed to doing it, and I just don't think he should have done it. Because if he now, and I just went back, if he now plays h5, I'm going to do like rook h6 and rook over, and he really can't ever take on g6 because Mr. Rook is hanging on h, there's a pin and win, as they say, right? So this is what happened. Rook here, bishop c6, king e3. Now here's an interesting situation. After I played bishop b7, a little bit to my horror, I came to understand that, yes, I've achieved something in that knight e4 is technically possible, but once it gets there, it can pretty well be ignored. So in contrast to the position with c3 where I had a target, now when my knight gets there, it's a very proud knight, but it's unclear how special it is. So Yes, in fact, I'm sure I could do it. In fact, let's just show. Rook h2 happened, and I could have probably played knight e4, but I liked my move better, a5. Why? Because I just want to play bishop a6. Now, one of the things I want to stress, so reintroducing this idea that there's three layers of the endgame. There's the maneuvering, there's the tactical, and then the algorithms, the Dvoretsky manual. What we've been looking at for the last, what do we got here? Well, 15 moves or so, has all just been maneuvering. There really hasn't been any big-time tactics involved here at all. And I think that now black is a little bit better. I think it's still very complicated, but I'd rather now be black because I've achieved the pawns on the right color on the queen side, because the white rooks feel a little bit discoordinated, and that the square on c3 feels kind of juicy. But what I'm trying to say is now the position becomes tactical. And one of the things that Smyslov wrote about in a book called Endgame Virtuoso, which I really love, a great collection of endgames that has some pithy words of wisdom, is that in general, in a chess game, whether it involves an endgame or not, there's going to be a maneuvering phase, and then the culmination of like whose strategy is better is going to be in the tactical phase, which we now have here. So my opponent can't give up his plan. He should probably give it up, but it's hard now because now I have a potential weakness on h4. So his truth here, if you want to call it that, is that he needs to get that going before he needs to kind of rid himself of the h4 pawn in addition to getting his rooks activated over there. And if he plays h5 here, I think I can just play rook h6 and then double. That was my intention anyway. He plays here, bishop h6. And now, boy, I guess I'm a little bit better. And maybe I'm significantly better because the rooks are committed over there on the king's side. Okay, so here we go. h5. Well, what should black do? Any ideas? I would love somebody to come on and try to explain what they think is happening here. Eric says black can just ignore the h5 push. Okay, well, what should he do? Rook h6, okay. Rook h6 is definitely an idea. Okay, well, let me show you what I did. And Roger and Narayan, I'm pronouncing your name wrong, I'm sure, are suggesting what I did. So let's look. Boom, boom, boom. And now here's a tactical question. After knight b5, what should I do? What should I do after knight b5? Narayan quickly says d4. Good. And I had seen this from a ways away. And one of the things that I want to stress about going over your games, I know it must seem boring because every time I come on this show, I'm always talking about going over your games. But one thing I want to stress about it is that if you play, like, when you think about opening play, you're going to get positions like this that have nothing to do with opening theory, but have everything to do with a position. So here, the beauty about d4 is when you are a French player, you're just looking to pop that pawn out at any moment, whether it's a sack or not. You're just always got that in the back of your mind. So yes, you're going to do some calculation, of course, but that is simply going to always be on your agenda. Okay. So now my opponent makes a mistake, but here's one of the reasons I wanted to show this position is, I'll show you first what happens. King takes d4, and now the game's actually over pretty easily with snip, check, check, and he resigned after rook b3 because rook b2 is a horrible threat. So for example, hg. And I'm just going to run the b pawn now, right? Okay. But the interesting question, and it was definitely positioned like I knew d4 was right, but I hadn't worked out all the details. So let's do this as a final exercise. This is Endgame's tactics. And again, after the maneuvering phase will be the tactical phase. At least that's what the traditional old-timers would say. And one video, maybe something we could do here on the US Chess School as well, would be an interesting just topic would be to see Fabi playing endgames, because the guy's a genius. Now, one of the reasons I brought it up just then is because a lot of times when I watch Fabi's endgames, it doesn't actually follow the old-time pattern of a strategical game moving into a tactical finale. It's usually just madness from the very beginning, or often. In any case, that would be something it'd be interesting for me to pursue and maybe interesting for you to think about. What should Black do? Brian says rook d8. Now, I'm going to tell you guys a secret. I was probably going to play rook d8. How much time do I have left? I've got some time. But when I played d4, I was just like, dude, that's such a strong move. I have 27 minutes to make it to move 40, so plenty of time. Hopefully, this is really a moment where I needed to check myself if the guy played king e4. In my initial calculation, king e4 was losing to rook d8. So let me just put that on the board. Why is rook d8 controversial? Why is rook d8 controversial? And this next resource, actually, Evan showed me after the game, and I didn't see it. I was just like, dude, you're getting mated. That's what I saw in this position. I was like, dude, you're getting mated. Austin says knight d6. Austin, what else? Knight d6, the bummer there is I could like take on h5 and then get ready to take on d3. Sefer has found it. Yeah. Really bizarre idea. Counterintuitive. Knight c3, bishop b7, knight d5. So if bishop d5, I just play king takes d4. Thank you very much. And if rook d5, then I think we just get out of dodge, you know? And then who knows what's happening anymore. Yeah. So that would have been a really rude awakening for me. And I would like to believe that I would have slowed it down here and not played rook d8 instantly. But I probably would have just been so happy at the idea of mating the guy that I might have played rook d8 too fast, right? Might have played it too fast. Now, somebody's saying just bishop b5. No, I don't want to give up my bishop at this point. No, I'm not. You can't get my bishop. No bishop for you, my friend. I think the winning move here, we can check this now, by the way, is just gh. And it's a very basic idea where I'm saying, bro, I don't mind you winning the exchange. Yeah. And I'm going to take care of this h-pawn business. And if you play rook takes h5, well, I could do a bunch of different things. Then I could trade everything and take on d3. And if you play knight c3, I believe that's hard for me to believe that that's not winning for black. So, for example, if rook h5, c2, that looks like rough. And then I believe if you go the other rook too, still c2, right? Pass pawns are a terrible thing. And I don't think there's any way, it's hard to imagine anyway, what you would do otherwise. Let's just say you do something like this. Now, maybe I got more than one thing. h4 looks good, but just this, it's just so cruel, Position like this, and I can play h4, I can play bishop g6. And one of the cool things actually about this position is we've been talking smack about the French bishop for so long. But here, the bishop, it's important to see when you get a position like this, a lot of times the bishop can be just as powerful as the rook. And one dogmatic thought I'll just leave you here with is the rooks always, I was a very old man before I understood this next truth. The rooks basically always control 14 squares. Doesn't matter whether they're in the center or not. They're just controlling 14 squares. But this bishop here is controlling 13, where it's standing. So the only problem, of course, with that 13 squares is I can't move to the dark squares. But if I got some bro, like the rook on h8, to help me cover the dark squares, then it's a good thing because he can help me. And so it's kind of a picturesque thing as a French player when your bishop achieves the final liberation, the final liberation over here. Winning position. And at some point I play bishop d5. I think I can just play h4 because you can't stop me from playing h3. I'll stick the bishop on f5. It won't be pleasant for a peasant. I could probably play h3 and bishop g2 as well. Okay. All right, you guys, very enjoyable. Next time, I think a cool thing for me to do here would be to talk about endgame tactics using Fabi's games. It's something I'm interested in doing. Well, he's got so many games where he has played beautiful endgame tactics, and they're always so rich. There are a lot of games that come to mind. The Caro game against Firouzja in the recent knockout thing, that was an incredible game. And anyways, there's loads of games of his to look at. All right, everybody, I'm going to leave it there. It's been a pleasure. Hopefully Greg Shahada will invite me back on. But if he doesn't, we all understand the reasons why he wouldn't do it. All right. Thank you all, and bye-bye.